Having strict concepts in audio can be helpful. For example, thinking that EQ controls the frequency response keeps things simple and straightforward. But strict definitions like this create a lot of oversight. Basic EQ filters affect the THD, the dynamic range, the ADSR, the noise floor, perceived loudness, and more. Understanding the interaction between EQ and all of these elements of a mix will change how you approach the processor. With this info, you'll make more informed decisions as you incrementally improve your productions. So, let's rethink EQ since it'll change how you mix music. Starting off, let's talk about EQ as an advanced mixing board. So when we mix, one of the first things that we do is set relative levels. We're changing the balance between various instruments by adjusting the amplitude with channel faders. And EQ does the same thing, but in a much more granular way. For example, say the kick's fundamental is 60 Hz. It has overtones at 180, 360, and some additional transients around 1 kHz. The bass fundamental is 110 Hz. It has overtones at 220, 440 Hz, and the percussive pluck is around 2 kHz. Meanwhile, snare starts around 140 Hz, has an overtone at 420 Hz, one at 840 Hz, and then some high end around 3 kHz. Now this is a simplification, but you get the idea. Each instrument is fitting into the frequency response like a puzzle. As we amplify or attenuate frequencies, it's the same as adjusting a channel fader. But instead of affecting the full instrument, we could adjust a fundamental, an overtone, and percussive element of the instrument, and so on. The Q value is like having multiple faders, each creating incremental change around the fundamental, the overtone, etc. that we want to affect. So, when you use an EQ on an individual track, think of it as an extension of your channel fader, but instead of amplifying or attenuating everything at once, you have multiple sub-channel faders with which you can make amplitude changes. So it's not just something that alters the frequencies, it's a complex mixer. Next up, let's consider the relationship between EQ and loudness. So a 6 dB change in amplitude doubles the loudness when amplifying and cuts the loudness in half when attenuating. So when we equalize, say, 2 kHz and we amplify it by 3 dB, we're increasing its loudness by 50%. If the Q value causes 1 kHz and 3 kHz to be amplified by 1.5 dB, we've increased the loudness of those ranges by 25%. Similarly, if we attenuate a resonance by 6 dB with a notch filter, then we've cut its loudness in half. Now this gets more complex when we consider how we perceive music and how loudness variations affect the overall track's loudness. Our ears have a resonance at 3.5 kHz, causing us to hear that range more easily. Additionally, the vocal's third formant is right around that frequency, so adjusting 3.5 kHz greatly impacts perceived loudness. Say on the vocal, I boost 3.5 kHz by 3 dB. That range is increased by about 50% in terms of its relative loudness. Now as for the overall track, it depends on the instrumentation that's present, but this boost will likely have a big impact on our perceived loudness of the track if the vocal is a main instrument in the mix. Similarly, if I was to increase 500 Hz on the bass by 3 dB, it'll increase that range's relative loudness by 50%, just like the vocal. But for the overall mix, it'll have a smaller impact on the loudness than our 3.5 kHz filter that's on the vocal. Now to show this, let's listen to these two examples. I'll boost 3.5 kHz on the vocal, then bypass the filter as I enable a bell at 500 Hz on the bass. Again, both are being amplified by 3 dB. Notice how the perceived loudness of the overall mix increases more when the 3.5 kHz filter is enabled than when the 500 Hz filter is enabled. I'll also use LUFS meters on both to show how the 3.5 kHz filter increases the measurement more than the 500 Hz filter.
Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble. Think it was impossible, may have been a bit of trouble.
Real quick, if you're looking for personalized audio engineering services specific to your needs, join the Sage Audio membership. Members get custom mastering and personalized one-on-one mixing feedback. Go to sageaudio.com or use the link in the description. Next up, let's cover EQ's effect on the dynamic range. So this concept is a little harder to understand, or maybe just for me to explain it, but some visuals should help. Let's say that we have a bass guitar and that's the only thing that's recorded for now. We have the fundamental and overtones, just like we discussed earlier. The fundamental peaks at -3 dB, The two overtones peak at negative 8 dB, and the percussive scrape peaks at around negative 12 dB. So let's say the quietest part of the performance is negative 53 dB. So right now, the dynamic range is 50 dB from the quietest part to the fundamental's peak. I'll use a bell filter on the fundamental, and I'll boost it by 2 dB. Now that peak is hitting almost negative 1 dB. Meanwhile, the quietest part of the affected range is also amplified, but only in that range that's been amplified. Other parts of the signal are not being affected. So let's say its level is now negative 52.5 dB. This bell filter has increased the bass's overall dynamic range by about 1.5 dB. Now imagine this on a much larger scale, in which we're using multiple filters on multiple instruments. It goes without saying that an EQ's effect on the dynamic range is incredibly complex, and it plays a much bigger role in the mix than one would think. For example, what if the fundamental and an overtone at 220 Hz collectively cause the aforementioned negative 3 dB peak? What would happen if I boosted the fundamental by 3 dB, but I dipped the overtone by 3 dB? The new peak level would be contingent upon the relative amplitude of each frequency. If the overtone plays a bigger role in that peak than the fundamental, then the 3 dB dip at 220 Hz should cause the overall peak to be lower after the filters are introduced. But if the fundamental plays a bigger role in causing that peak, then the 3 dB boost at 110 Hz should increase the peak's level. So there's a lot of interconnectivity here. To show this, let's equalize an instrument. I'll introduce a bell filter on a higher amplitude range, and notice how the peak level increases. Then I'll introduce some filters to other ranges and attenuate. Notice how the peak level drops in a way that isn't equivalent to the overall amount boosted or cut. Next up, let's cover how EQ introduces and affects THD. So the effect is minimal, but an EQ introduces harmonic distortion, even if it's not supposed to. Small variations between how the EQ measures a signal's amplitude and the actual amplitude cause minute harmonic distortion. But EQ affects distortion in a much more significant way. For example, say I distort a 100 Hz sine wave. Depending on the wave shaping amount and the symmetry, I'll achieve various harmonics at varying amplitudes. Typically, harmonic distortion decreases in amplitude the higher the order or the frequency. But I could equalize one or more of these harmonics and alter the distortion's amplitude. So let's say I have even and odd ordered harmonics, and I boost everything above 200 Hz with a shelf. The total harmonic distortion is increased relative to the original signal. If this EQ is after the saturator, I could even use a high-pass filter to get rid of the original 100 Hz sine wave. In this instance, I've isolated the harmonic distortion, significantly changing the relationship between clean and distorted. Now, what I'm about to show you in the demo might be too inconvenient to do in a normal mixing situation, but hopefully it's interesting nonetheless. I'll send a bass guitar to a parallel or auxiliary track. With a linear phase low-pass filter, I'll isolate the bass to just the fundamental notes of the progression. Then I'll insert a saturation plugin and distort the isolated range to ensure the harmonics only generate from the fundamentals. Then I'll use one more linear phase EQ to amplify or attenuate the harmonics that the saturator generated. With this setup, I could use EQ to control the harmonic distortion with a lot more precision than if I just used a distortion plugin by itself. That said, keep in mind that EQ will control distortion even without the setup, so long as distortion has been introduced before the EQ is inserted. Last up, let's cover EQ as a psychoacoustic distorter and pitch shifter. Now, admittedly, these effects aren't super common, but in my opinion, they're really interesting and they're worth talking about. So amplitude increases of specific frequencies can cause two psychoacoustic effects. First, it could cause the listener to perceive harmonics that aren't in the original signal. For example, if I use an EQ to significantly boost 2 kHz, harmonics at 4 kHz, 8 kHz, and so on will be perceived, even though they're not occurring in the original signal the process signal, or even the signal coming out of the speakers. It's entirely due to the perception and not the physical sound. The same could be said for pitch. If I use an EQ to boost 100 Hz significantly, say by 30 dB, the pitch will be perceived as lower by almost 5%. Now this is nearly a semitone or a half step. In other words, the 100 Hz sine wave would sound like a 95 Hz sound wave. Something similar happens to the highs. If I boost these significantly, we perceive them as higher in pitch, although I couldn't find exact numbers for how much is needed to cause X amount of perceived change. So, controlling the amplitude of specific frequencies can drastically change the timbre through psychoacoustic harmonic distortion and the perceived pitch by as much as a semitone with 30 dB of amplification. With that in mind, let's take a listen to a 100 Hz tone as its amplitude is gradually increased. Let me know in the comments if you perceive any variation in its pitch. As I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for personalized audio engineering services specific to your needs, join the Sage Audio membership. Members get custom mastering and personalized one-on-one mixing feedback. Go to sageaudio.com or use the link in the description.